For centuries, we've searched for our past in broken ruins and forgotten scrolls. But the greatest archive of Earth's history lies hidden in plain sight, buried beneath 3 kilometers of ice. In Greenland, each frozen layer is a page of our planet's story, preserving whispers of ancient climates, echoes of volcanic fire, and even the fingerprints of cosmic catastrophes. Today, scientists drill deep into this frozen time machine, unlocking secrets of an event so violent it nearly reset civilization itself. This is not just a story of ice, it's the story of us. The camera opens on an endless sea of white, Greenland stretching as far as the eye can see. To most, it looks like a frozen wasteland, silent, lifeless, forbidding. But beneath this icy desert lies something extraordinary. For thousands of years, humans have searched for history in broken ruins, in weathered stones, and in the fragile ink of ancient scrolls. Yet the most complete, the most detailed, and the most faithful archive of Earth's history is not found in temples, nor in libraries. It is hidden here, buried beneath nearly 3 kilometers of ice. Imagine every snowfall as a page in a book, a page that gently settles, pressed down by the next snowfall, and the next, year after year, century after century, until layers build into a colossal record. Each layer locks away a snapshot of that very year, a trace of the air, the climate, the dust carried on the wind, the whispers of volcanoes, and sometimes even the fingerprints of disasters from the stars themselves. What looks to us like plain white ice is in fact a time capsule, an untouched archive that stretches back not just centuries, but hundreds of thousands of years. Inside these frozen layers are tiny bubbles of air, real air, that once brushed across the faces of mammoths, that once filled the lungs of the very first humans to walk Europe. Imagine holding in your hand a piece of ice, and inside it, a breath from 100,000 years ago. It is both humbling and electrifying. But Greenland's ice is not just a silent witness. It is an active storyteller. Each layer speaks of winters colder than any we know today, and summers when strange plants bloomed on Arctic shores. Some layers carry black dust from volcanic eruptions that shook the skies. Others hold pollen from forests that no longer exist. And still others are marked by mysterious particles, fragments that seem to have come from worlds beyond our own. Scientists call this vast frozen record the Ice Library. And like any great library, it is organized, precise, and astonishingly detailed. By drilling deep into the ice, extracting long, cylindrical cores, researchers can literally read history in sequence, layer by layer, storm by storm, eruption by eruption. It is as if the planet itself kept a diary, and then sealed it safely away in this frozen vault. Think about it. In Egypt, the oldest papyrus we possess is perhaps 5,000 years old. In Mesopotamia, the earliest tablets date back 6,000 years. But in Greenland, the archive goes back more than 100,000 years. Longer than any written word. Longer than most of human civilization itself. This is history written not by kings, nor by scribes, but by the earth itself. And so the question becomes, if we can learn to read these icy pages, what stories do they tell us? Could they reveal how climates rose and fell? How species struggled and survived? How entire civilizations were born in times of stability, only to collapse when the environment shifted? Could these frozen layers even hold the smoking gun of cataclysms so vast they nearly reset the course of humanity itself? The answer, as we will see, is yes. For locked within Greenland's ice are clues to one of the most dramatic and controversial chapters in Earth's story. A chapter marked by sudden fire in the sky, by the extinction of giants, and by the near erasure of entire cultures. A chapter that scientists are only now beginning to piece together, thanks to the patience, the persistence, and the brilliance of those who dared to drill through the ice. But before we dive into that mystery, we must first understand how to read this frozen book. Because like any archive, the ice library is only as valuable as our ability to decipher it. The methods may seem simple, cylinders of ice pulled from the deep, but what they reveal is nothing less than breathtaking. And it all begins with the first cut into the glacier. The camera shifts from the sweeping landscapes of Greenland to the small figures of scientists in red parkas, standing against the vastness of white. They are not explorers in search of new lands, but detectives, searching for stories buried beneath the ice. And their tools are not swords or maps, but drills, meters of steel designed to pierce into the ancient heart of the glacier. This is how you read a glacier. You cannot simply walk across its surface and expect the past to reveal itself. The secrets of Greenland are locked deep inside, sometimes more than 3 kilometers below your feet. To reach them, scientists set up massive drilling rigs in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Imagine working in temperatures that can freeze exposed skin in seconds, winds that can topple tents, and months of endless day or night. And yet, they endure, because every meter of ice they pull up is a page in Earth's diary. The drilling process is a feat in itself. A hollow drill descends slowly into the ice, cutting a perfect cylinder, sometimes 4, sometimes 5 meters long at a time. The drill then rises, and the scientists carefully slide out a glistening core, a frozen cylinder that may hold clues stretching back tens of thousands of years. One after another, these icy pages are laid end to end, until they create a timeline that can extend over 120,000 years. Imagine unrolling a scroll that long, each section marked with the fingerprints of history. Once the cores are stored in laboratories, the real work begins. Scientists slice them into sections, polish them under microscopes, and scan them with lasers. Each layer tells a story, and just like counting the rings of a tree, researchers can count the annual bands in the ice. Winter snow is denser, darker. Summer snow is lighter, more porous. Layer after layer builds a calendar of years, one that scientists can read with incredible precision. Sometimes they can pinpoint not just a century, not just a year, but even a single season from more than 10,000 years ago. Think about that? A summer storm from the Ice Age, still captured in perfect detail. But the layers are only the beginning. Look closer, and you see tiny spheres trapped inside, ancient air bubbles. At first glance, they seem ordinary, small imperfections in the ice, but under a microscope, they become windows into vanished atmospheres. Each bubble contains real air, the very breath of the Earth from that time: carbon dioxide, methane, oxygen, frozen snapshots of our planet's lungs. It is as if time itself inhaled, and then held that breath for us to study. For scientists, decoding this record is like running a forensic investigation. They gather the evidence, layer by layer, bubble by bubble, particle by particle, until patterns emerge. Patterns that tell of slow shifts and sudden catastrophes. Patterns that reveal how delicate our climate truly is, and how vulnerable our civilizations may be when the balance tips. And so, the value is not just academic. When we learn how to read the glacier, we do not just understand the past, we glimpse the forces that will shape our future. Already, the ice tells us that climate can change violently, in ways that transform entire ecosystems. Already, It warns us that the line between stability and collapse is razor thin, and the story it holds, one of cosmic fire and frozen winters, may be the key to unlocking one of the greatest mysteries in human history. But that story begins with an anomaly, a fingerprint so rare, so unexpected, that it forced scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew. It was not carved into stone, nor written on clay, but locked inside the ice of Greenland, and it pointed, not to Earth, but to the stars. For centuries, glaciers have recorded history in silence, layer after layer of frozen testimony. But sometimes, within those layers, there is a clue so strange, so unexpected, that it does not just whisper the past. It screams. Around 12,800 years ago, something dramatic happened on Earth. The climate, which had been warming after the last ice age, suddenly plunged back into near glacial conditions. This cold snap, lasting over 1,000 years, is known as the Younger Dryas. To this day, it is one of the greatest mysteries in climate history. What could have caused such a sudden reversal? Scientists turned to Greenland's ice cores for answers. They drilled into the layers corresponding to this exact moment in time, slicing them with surgical precision, analyzing every particle, every bubble, expecting to see subtle shifts in gases or volcanic dust. But what they found was neither subtle nor expected. In the ice, dated precisely to the onset of the Younger Dryas, there was a sudden spike, a sharp surge in the concentration of a metal, platinum. At first, the discovery made little sense. Platinum is one of the rarest elements in Earth's crust, far rarer than gold. You could search a ton of rock and find only a few tiny grains. So why would Greenland's ice, from 12,000 years ago, suddenly be laced with it? To understand the magnitude of this finding, you have to know where platinum usually comes from. Here on Earth, it is buried deep, locked away in the mantle, inaccessible except through extraordinary geological processes. But in space, in the rubble of asteroids and comets, platinum is abundant. Their metallic cores are rich in it, and when such bodies collide with Earth, they leave behind not only craters, but also their chemical fingerprints. So when scientists saw platinum spiking in the ice, they knew it was no ordinary signal. It was not a local volcano. It was not drifting dust. It was something else entirely. Think of it this way. Imagine detectives investigating a crime scene. For hours, they search for clues: dust, footprints, broken glass. Then suddenly, on a door handle, they find a perfect fingerprint. Clear, undeniable. And when they run it through the database, it doesn't match anyone on Earth. That is exactly what the platinum anomaly represented. A fingerprint, left not by our planet, but by the cosmos. What made the discovery even more extraordinary was that it did not stop in Greenland. Other scientists began to find the same platinum spike in sediments across North America, in Europe, even as far as South America, all dated to exactly the same moment, 12,800 years ago. It was as if a dusting of extraterrestrial metal had been sprinkled across half the globe in an instant. This was no longer a curiosity. This was evidence, and yet, evidence of what? The spike of platinum seemed to shout of an impact. The kind of collision between Earth and a cosmic wanderer that can unleash chaos on a planetary scale. Such an impact could explain sudden wildfires, massive floods, and above all, the abrupt return of glacial cold known as the Younger Dryas. But science demands caution. Data must be weighed. Alternatives tested. Could it have been something else? A volcano unknown? A strange quirk in chemistry? Layer after layer was tested. Over and over, the same signal emerged. Platinum, where it should not be, and nowhere near the levels Earth could naturally provide. The fingerprint was too sharp, too global, too extraterrestrial. For the first time, the ice was not simply telling us about Earth's past climate. It was pointing to an intruder, a visitor from space whose arrival coincided with one of the most abrupt climate disasters in human history. And with that realization, the Younger Dryas was no longer just a puzzle of temperature curves and ice sheets. It became a crime scene. The Earth, the victim. The ice, the witness. And platinum, the fingerprint left behind by the suspect. The stage was set for a new kind of investigation, one that would cross continents, sift through craters, and resurrect legends of fire from the sky. The trail of evidence had begun, and it pointed not to Earth, but beyond. Every mystery demands its suspects, and when it comes to the Younger Dryas, two contenders stand above the rest, one from beneath the Earth, the other from beyond the stars. Suspect number 1, the Super-Volcano. These giants are among the most destructive forces on our planet. In a single eruption, they can darken skies, poison air, and trigger global winters that last for years. The fingerprints they leave behind are unmistakable. A dense layer of sulfuric acid locked in the ice, a chemical haze of volcanic ash, and unique mineral signatures that betray their source. So, what do the Greenland ice cores say? Scientists searched the layers from exactly 12,800 years ago, expecting, perhaps, to see sulfur spikes, to see volcanic dust, to see the dark fingerprint of a planet erupting from within. But the pages of the ice were silent. No sulfuric acid surge, no ash cloud residue, no trace of a catastrophic eruption at the critical moment. The Super-Volcano, it seems, has no alibi, but also no evidence of guilt. Suspect number 2, the cosmic impact. Unlike volcanoes, these catastrophes do not rise from Earth's depths. They fall from the heavens. Their calling cards are unlike anything terrestrial. Sudden spikes in rare metals such as platinum and iridium. Tiny glassy microspherules born from rock flash-melted in fireballs. And nanodiamonds, crystals so small they can only form under pressures greater than those found in the Earth's crust. The kind created when a cosmic hammer strikes our world. And what do the ice cores reveal? In the layers dated precisely to the Younger Dryas boundary, the platinum surge stands tall, a perfect match to an extraterrestrial visitor. But the evidence does not end in Greenland. Across North America, Europe, even in South America, scientists uncovered the same suite of forensic traces. Black mats in ancient soils filled with melted spheres, carbon-rich layers scarred by fire, and above all, nanodiamonds glittering under microscopes. The case for a cosmic culprit grows stronger with every discovery. Where the volcano leaves silence, the impact leaves shouts. Where the volcano cannot be found, the cosmic fingerprints appear everywhere, and so, the scientific investigation reaches its turning point. We have two suspects, one powerful but absent, one extraordinary and present at the scene. Logic demands a verdict. The conclusion is as startling as it is profound. The ice cores of Greenland, those silent witnesses of time, have delivered their testimony, and they tell us this. The catastrophe that hurled Earth into the Younger Dryas did not come from beneath our feet. It came from the sky. For the first time, the story is no longer one of speculation. It is one of evidence, a verdict written not in myth, but in molecules of platinum and dustings of cosmic glass. The true suspect, the agent of chaos 12,800 years ago, was a visitor from the stars. So, what does this layer of platinum truly mean? For the people who walked the Earth 12,800 years ago, it is not just an abstract clue in ice. It is the marker of a cataclysm that changed the human story forever. In an instant, the warming Earth was thrown back into an icy grip. The glaciers that had begun to retreat surged forward again. Rivers froze, forests died, and the climate of the entire planet shifted almost overnight. The ecosystems collapsed. Giant beasts that had roamed the continents for hundreds of thousands of years. The mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats vanished in waves of extinction. Landscapes once teeming with life grew silent, and the age of megafauna came to a sudden, frozen end. But the catastrophe was not only ecological, it was human. Across North America, the Clovis culture masters of stone, spear points, and big game hunting disappeared from the archaeological record. Entire ways of life unraveled in the face of sudden scarcity, fire, and ice. For the survivors, adaptation meant more than invention. It meant sheer endurance. And here we must ask a haunting question. Did the memory of this great calamity echo through time? Could the flood myths of Mesopotamia, the stories of lost golden ages, the tales of worlds before our own, be distorted memories of this Younger Dryas catastrophe, passed down across generations, across millennia, until they became legend instead of history? If that is true, then Greenland's ice cores are not only data, they may be the first physical confirmation of some of humanity's oldest and most enduring myths. The science of frozen bubbles and dust particles collides here with the realm of story. And in that collision, we glimpse a forgotten past. But the greatest lesson may not be about the past. It is about the present. The ice tells us that Earth's climate can change not slowly, but violently, abruptly, in ways that erase entire species and cultures. The balance that sustains us is not guaranteed. It is fragile, astonishingly fragile, and now, we are writing our own layer into the ice, a layer of carbon, of plastic fragments, of chemical traces that no glacier has ever seen before. Thousands of years from now, when future scientists drill into the ice, what will they read? What story will the frozen library of Greenland tell about us? Perhaps the Younger Dryas was a warning from deep time, not just about survival, but about humility, that even the mightiest species can be humbled in an instant. And perhaps the question the ice is asking us is this: do we truly understand the fragility of our own civilization before it becomes just another layer in history's frozen archive?